Hey guys, how's it going? Malcolm here. It is 6:25 on Tuesday evening. I'm about to play in round four, which is my third game of the U.S. Open Chess Championships, and I'm playing against Arthur Antler, who's an 1838 rated player from New Jersey, who also has 1.5 out of 3. I feel like I might have some good chances based on his previous games. His win and his draw came against like not great players, and his loss actually came to an unrated player that's won no other games. So this guy might be a little bit overrated, and if I can sort of remain calm and play accurately and defensively, then I hope I'll have good chances. I've already plugged it in the rating calculator, and losing doesn't like hurt me a whole lot, but winning or drawing gains me a ton. So that means that like there should be no pressure. So I'm hoping that I can let the low stakes of the match for me appropriately settle into my emotional state, and I'll be able to remain calm enough in order to play accurately. But because I'm playing black, I'm going to feel a lot of pressure. But I'm looking forward to it. I mean, so far this tournament has been very fun, and every night is another opportunity for sort of glory or learning. So win-win. All right, I probably need to pack up and head over. I'll see you guys later. Gosh, I kind of wanted to cry after the round was over. I played a really good game and just totally blew it. I don't have a ton more to say than that. Luckily, I've had to walk home to sort of regather myself, and I know in a little bit I'm going to think of this as a learning experience. But that's not how I feel right now. That's not how I feel right now at all. Why don't you and I go ahead and just take a look at how the game went, and we'll figure it out from there. But like, ugh. Okay, so we're playing black against Arthur Antler, who's rated 1838. So we're not supposed to win this at all. Our opponent plays d4, and our coaches suggest that we play knight f6, the Nimzo Indian, and our opponent responds with knight f3, and I don't really know what to do, so I play e6, because I know we're supposed to get our bishop out at some point. So our opponent plays bishop g5, the Tory attack. I totally ignore that. I go for like this Sicilian idea of c5. My opponent takes, and I take. So now I have this problem to solve, but like this is actually good for me. Like I'm actually up half a pawn here. I felt okay about this position. I felt pretty good actually. There were several different things. So if my opponent makes a nothing move, then when I take, he takes back. I can go knight check. My opponent goes back. I take the bishop. He takes my knight, and I take his knight. And I'm now up 2.2. He's king can't castle. I've won a pawn. Like things are great for me. So that's not what happened, but I saw that as a potential line. So my opponent plays e3 to prevent that. Good on their part. The position's fairly equal. And then I play knight c6 because I'm like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do, but knight c6 seems fair. This is probably the wrong idea. I think I need to play d5 at some point, but I didn't want to trap this bishop. So my opponent plays knight bd2, defending this knight, and preparing to castle queenside if he wants. Lots of different options for him. And I play a6, thinking I want to do this and this. I want his bishop to not be able to go anywhere or not be able to do anything. This has some problems, as we'll see pretty quickly, because my opponent plays a4. So now I can't play b5 because my rook is disconnected from my queen and the other rook. So I settle for playing the move b6, which is probably not great. Yeah, the computer does not like this move. But I thought, hey, we're solving some of the issues here. However, this is actually problematic for us, and we're going to see why in just a second here. So my opponent plays knight e4, and that threatens this and this. Well, I played bishop e7, which is the second best line. And the thing that I was worried about, actually, was if bishop takes, this knight check is super annoying. Like, this is bad for us, because now our king's not going to be able to castle, we're losing our bishop, then this pawn's going to be weak, like, this does not feel great for us. So maybe we have to play pawn takes, but then our king, like, there's nowhere safe to castle anymore. I guess we have to, like, step up and push this, but it's going to be a weird game for us. The computer says that none of this is too problematic, but instead our opponent played knight d6 check right away, and so I played bishop takes, and my opponent played queen takes. And so now I was thinking I really want his queen out of here, and so I played queen d7, and the only thing I was really worried about was this. And so he played queen takes, and I played king takes, because I don't want to mess up my pawn structure. e4, threatening to go here and take this knight. h6, attacking his bishop. And my opponent played bishop takes f6, and I played king takes f6. So now, like, we're getting close to the end game, and my king's in a good spot, I feel. Turns out this is, like, a pro and a con, but now the problem to solve is this and this. These two things are bad. And so at this point, my opponent long castles, attacking this pawn, and I play rook d8. This looks right, because my opponent wants to stop this, and I played bishop b7. And so my opponent played rook he1, lining up here, and yeah, this is totally equal. We're doing fine here. I've equalized out of the opening. Things are okay. And I played d6. I spent forever thinking, and I played this. That prevents my opponent from pushing the pawn because I can take, and then after all of this, like, my opponent's going to be down a pawn, and even if it's a double pawn, it seems good for me. And my opponent played king b1, just sort of making a natural prophylactic move. I played knight e5, thinking trade, and things here should be good for me. And then my opponent played f4. And so I'm curious, is the best line to take the pawn? The best line is to take the pawn, but even if I don't, then the game is fairly equal, which I did not. I was scared to take that pawn. I saw a bunch of checks happening and things coming back here, and I didn't like how that looked. So I didn't do it, even though I think it can net me a couple of pawns. So my opponent plays g3, just sort of setting up here on the dark square, so my bishop can't really do that much. And I play king e7, because I want to wrap around and be able to push this sucker. And my opponent plays rook d4, and I was a little bit mystified by some of the moves that they're making in this section. And I played rook ac8, attacking the bishop. So now there are some tactics starting to become available. My opponent plays bishop b3, just sort of safeguarding all of these things at once. I don't love this move for my opponent, but it kind of ends up cramping their space, but that's fine. I play rook c5, just getting ready to double up on the semi-open file that I have. My opponent plays rook b4, attacking this pawn. So I play b5, a takes, and rook takes. And I think my opponent played rook a4. And I played rook c8, because we're still defended here, and I want to get all up in this business. I want to do one of these two things. I'm not entirely sure yet. And so my opponent plays rook d1. Spent a long time thinking, played rook d1. And I played rook c5. I spent a lot of time thinking, and this seemed like the appropriate thing to do. Now they're like, I'm guarding all this stuff. I can come over here and harass if I want to. Things here seem good. My opponent plays rook d4. So now we're both all lined up here, and I played a5. And the computer says this is the appropriate move. I'm proud. I spent a lot of time thinking on that move. And my opponent played rook ac4, and it's the best line. The best line is e5, which is, I didn't play that quite yet. So I played rook takes c4, and rook takes c4. And I played rook c5, and I thought my opponent was going to trade here. And this takes it from a slight advantage to me to a draw. But that's okay, because my opponent then blundered. I was surprised, and played rook d4, and that allows for this e5. So now things are good for me. So opponent plays rook a4, and I play bishop c6, which is not good. Now he's got to back up. Rook a3, and I win a pawn. Congratulations, me. Now I do have to be careful, because the extra pawn that I have is this one, which sucks, and these guys are going to be difficult for me to get counterplay against, but we're solidly ahead in the position. We're +2. So I felt good about the maneuvering game that I've been playing so far. So my opponent plays bishop a4, trying to get his bishop out to be able to do something, because over here it wasn't able to do anything. Now it turns out all of these squares are still defended, so this bishop is no better here than it was other places. And I'm still eyeing up this, so I've got more tactics on the way if my opponent moves his bishop somewhere, which I'd like him to, but right now I'm not giving him the opportunity. A4, and I played f6. I was like, look, I just don't want to lose lose these pawns doing something stupid. So f takes and f takes, and rook e3. This attacking my bishop. I played bishop f5. Bishop b3, bishop e6, takes and takes. That's fine. I traded, so we still have some of an advantage, but not as much of an advantage as we would have if we keep the bishops on the board, which is fair. This rook endgame proved to be very complicated and difficult. So my opponent played rook b3, trying to get some counterplay. I played rook d5, which is the computer move, so I'm still up a couple of pawns here. My opponent played king c1. I'm cutting off his king and he can't do anything. And I played e4, because passed pawns are meant to be pushed. My opponent played rook b8, getting ready to come check me. And I played king f5, which is kind of dumb, but that's okay. My opponent played rook e8, attacking this pawn. And I played rook e5, because this is a winning endgame for me. Like we see, if trade, then I'm super duper winning. You can see it goes up to +3, and it's going to be more and more. So my opponent did not play that. My opponent instead played rook f8 check. And I think this is part of where I start to go wrong. Everything's winning, but I play king g6, and that's bad. That already loses me like one of the two advantages that I have. And then my opponent played rook d8. Oh, sorry, it's king d1. Sorry. So my opponent played king d1, and I played rook f5, trying to trade again. And my opponent played, and here already we're like losing more of our advantage. Played rook d8, and I played d5. And then my opponent played rook a8, and I played rook f2, which is a huge blunder here for us. So that loses all advantage, and now it's a draw. The computer line says I should play d4 here. And I saw this, but then I was like, okay, well, what about when he comes back? Like, how do I deal with this? Apparently the answer is rook f1 check, and if king e2, then rook c1. Like, we're okay trading here and here and here because this is check. Aha, 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 aha. Well, that makes sense. But I did not do that. I played rook f2, which is bad. So now it's a draw. That's dumb. And so my opponent takes, and I was thinking I'll take here, right? So my thought was, oh, I'll take this, and he'll take this. Well, actually, I didn't see that he could take this, which is the problem. This actually is better than what I did. I just went back. Promote. So now it's a dead draw. Two over here, and the advantage that my opponent has is that he has the outside pawns and I have the inside pawns. The only advantage I have is that mine are further advanced. So this is only 3 moves away from queening. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves away from queening. But my king can't be in both places at once, and his king can kind of just sit in the middle here. So now it becomes a very difficult to draw for me, unfortunately. My opponent played c3, and things are still in the bounce. I played king f6. My opponent played king e2, and I played king e6. I wasn't worried about this check because I can just step up. And there are actually all kinds of tactics along here. One of the things I have to be ready for is this push. But similarly, if I can get their king to step up, then I can go here with check and take their rook. So these rooks are dangerously opposed. So my opponent plays rook b5, and I play king d6, and then my opponent plays c4. And so yeah, now my opponent has the advantage. I apparently need to be walking my king up this way as opposed to around this way, but I wanted to be in the place where the pawns could get stopped. Perhaps instead of going over this way, instead tucking up my king and getting my rook out and active might have been useful. This rook is kind of stuck here right now, and he's basically just defending this pawn. But I can't take here. So first of all, I can't take because rook takes rook, and I'm losing the game. It's probably just announced as mate. So I play king c6, and my opponent plays rook takes. And if I play rook takes and pawn takes and king takes, then like my opponent has the advantage here, right? He's going to step up and stop this pawn. I have to somehow stop this pawn, and then my opponent's closer to the pawns that are over here, so I'm not going to be able to like get down and around fast enough. It's going to be really hard. The computer just can't see far enough for that. So instead, I played rook f3. My opponent plays rook e5, getting behind this pawn. I play rook b3, saying, okay, we can trade these pawns. That doesn't bother me because I'm going to get another pawn in the end there. And my opponent played rook b5 and said, no, I don't want you to get that pawn. And I said, okay, we can go back, no problem. We can repeat. And so my opponent played rook e5 again, and I played rook b3. And at this point, I offered a draw because I'm like very clearly like losing here. And if not losing, then like it will be a draw. And so even though I for the most part never offered draws in this position, like I've been playing forever. I was a guy 600 points higher rated than me, and I was not winning anymore. I'm down a pawn as opposed to being up a pawn, and I wanted the game to be over. But my opponent declined, which was smart, and played rook takes e4, and I played rook takes b2 check. My opponent played king f3, and I played rook takes h2. So now it's a draw. So my opponent plays rook e6 check, and I play king d7, and we're going to see when the loss is here again, because it felt fine, but it was very hard. Like, I thought it was like zugzwang the whole way, but then it was not. So I played king d7, my opponent played rook g6, and I played rook c2. So still a draw. My opponent plays rook d7 check, I play king d8. I don't want my opponent to get in front of this pawn, and apparently that's problematic. Apparently I should just run my king back in this direction. So that's the first mistake, king d8. My opponent plays rook g4, now defending both of his pawns here and here. And so I play rook c3. I say, okay, we can both do this, and this is rook c3 check. Oh gosh, we're not even close to done, guys. King g2, king e7, rook f4 check. Sorry, rook f4, rook f4, king e6, king h3, king e5. So there are a lot of things my opponent can't do. King h4, and I was proud of this move. This move felt good. I played h5, but if my opponent takes, then I can take here, and I'm threatening to take the rook. And my opponent's king is stuck, and all those things are good. If my opponent tries to step in, then I can take with check, and I'm winning. If my opponent tries to push the pawn, then I take. So there were a lot of things that my opponent couldn't do. My opponent can't check me. There are many things that cannot happen here. So I felt like I was really fighting here. My opponent plays king h3. He just goes, no, you can't do that. That's not. And so I said rook c2. I said, well, you can't back up. And he played rook h4, going for the pawn this way. And so I played king f6, recognizing that like putting my rook here doesn't help because his king is now defending. And my opponent played rook d4. I played king g6. My opponent played rook d6 check. I played king g7. My opponent played rook c6. Is that right? And I played rook c3, going back. And you can see the advantage starting to creep up here. So not sure where the blunder is. It might have just been a very slow. This might just be too deep for the computer. Gosh, you can see I was totally winning in the middle there, guys. King h4, king f7, rook c5, king g6, rook c6, king g7, rook c5, king g6, and I was like, oh, are we gonna get a draw here? Are we gonna get a draw? But the answer is no. Rook g5 check, and king f6 is apparently wrong somehow. What's the right move here? King f7 is somehow better. c5, so now he's defending this pawn again. And I played rook c1, which is fine. My opponent played rook takes h5, so now he has 2 pawns to 0, and there's not a ton I can do about it. I played rook c4 check. My opponent played g4. I played king g6, threatening all kinds of things. Now he can't back up because things are happening. I mean, I guess he can back up, but it doesn't really matter. My opponent played rook g5 check. I played king f6, so that's not good. I should have gone king h6, I guess. Rook d5, king f7, king g5, and now things are steadily headed downhill. King e7, king f5, king e8, and now the computer's starting to see g5, king f8, king f6, king e8, g6, rook f4 check, rook f5. I promise it's worth it. Rook g4. There's something at the end here. g7, king d7, rook g5, rook f4 check, king e5, king e8, queen, king d7, king takes, king c6, queen e6 check, king b5, check, here, check, here. And the thing I was going for is this. Stalemate. That's what I was looking for. That's what I was hoping for. And right at the end, that is not what happened. My opponent played rook check, one legal move, and check for mate. So that's what ended up happening. That's how the game went, guys. Oh, so you can see why I'm devastated. That was so hard. It was so hard. It was so hard. I was winning and then I lost, and it was all because of like subtle rook nonsense. I'm just gonna have to practice. But if I can take somebody 600 points higher rated than me and take them out behind the woodshed and almost beat them, it means I should have hope about the next game. So we'll take that away. Now, finally, we had to check up on our other guy to see how he did because his rating affects my rating, and he beat in 1163. So that puts his new rating at 1251. So we plug in 1251 for our second guy, and we look at what our rating is. That actually moves us up to 1288, even though we lost. Cool. So our tournament performance has been pretty okay, actually, because we beat a 1251 and we lost to an 1838. But actually, despite all, and we lost to a 2000. But despite that, actually, our performance has gone up to 1288 because losing to those two people doesn't matter nearly as much as beating that 1251. Oh, so at least we can take that positive away. Now, this video file is enormous, so it's going to take me a little while to edit it, and I need to go make a few phone calls and stuff, so I'm going to call it a night. But I look forward to tomorrow. Tonight was really hard, though. It was a 5-hour game. Oh, my gosh. Okay, anyways, I don't have anything more to say. I'll see you guys tomorrow.